Hello, you malty masses of munificent malt marshals. It's a malt mention, and a big malt mention thank you to Eugene Kelly. Thank you, Eugene, for providing the malt mention introducing Ralphie Review 1023 extras, extra content, extra perspective, and extra information on primarily on Scotch whisky, but it applies to any spirit out there, whether it be rum, bourbon, rye, or brandy, or tequila, or anything. And it's to do with a situation which has cropped up through my Patreon channel. And there's a lot of additional content in my Patreon channel for subscribers, including, apart from extra videos in the week, live streams. The Patreon subscriber live streams once a month from the bothy, lasting about 2 hours, in which I introduce 3 whiskies from my stash, and I also discuss a little bit of extra information, what's called the extra extras. And one of the questions I was given was from a malt mate who had bought a bottle of 25-year-old single malt. And when I checked the price where I am, it probably cost him about £500. And he opened the bottle and he poured a glass and he immediately could tell that something wasn't right. So he gave it a bit of extra time, as we do, came back to the bottle and found that it was dull, flat and hot. Now, when you ever come across a dull, flat, hot whisky, there's 2 reasons for this. One is that the distillate has been rapidly distilled. In other words, the pot still has been overboiled and creates bitter liquor. But that's unlikely with this particular brand because they're careful with the make of their spirit. They always have been, the new make spirit. But in fact, it's also a symptom, particularly dull and flat, is a symptom of what's called soured casks. Now, this particularly affects sherry casks because the content of sherry casks is at 20% volume, whereas in bourbon casks, it's at 60 to 70, sometimes even 80% volume. And you find the situation with sherry casks, because it's got lower alcohol in it, when the cask's been emptied and it's lying empty, the alcohol tends to dissipate more quickly than in, say, an ex-bourbon cask, simply because the higher strength in the bourbon cask, it holds for longer. And also, there's less sugar naturally occurring in the bourbon, and there's more sugar naturally occurring from the sherry because it's a wine ferment. And the situation happens quite regularly, actually, that casks go sour once they've been emptied. Sherry casks, exactly the same with wine casks, they start to go sour because bacteria start to grow inside the cask, feeding off the sugars. And when they do, the bacteria excrete a vinegar-like substance, which is basically like vinegar. So you've got a vinegared cask. Again, it can happen with port, it can happen with red wines, white wines. And this is why these particular casks in particular need to be handled and sourced and delivered and utilised while they're fresh. Historically, what they would do in Jerez, while they were holding on to these casks before they sold them, is they would burn sulphur candles inside of them to sterilise them against the bacterial contamination, which is why some old whiskies out there are horribly over-sulphured, because the distillers never properly rinsed out and prepared the cask before they filled it with their valuable new make spirit. And the reason historically they did this, because it didn't matter to them, because it was all going off to the blenders anyway to go into some blend along with thousands of other casks. But times have changed. There's a big premium in single malt whisky, and there is absolutely no excuse for any distiller anywhere in Scotland to be putting new make spirit or already matured whisky into soured casks. How do you tell if the cask's soured? Simple. You nose it. You remove the bung and you nose it. What happens when you get a bad bottling? Well, I recommend that you check with your friends to see if they agree with you. Then, once you've confirmed it's a bad quality and you've paid a massive premium for it, because it's single malt Scotch whisky, it's not just a bottle of vodka we're talking about, go back to the shop that you bought it from. Ask them to smell it and ask them to taste it. They are in a better position than you to approach the sales marketing team and the distillery to lodge a complaint, not just in your behalf, but on the shop's behalf. Because no retailer, particularly the specialist retailer, wants to be unknowingly selling a bad batch of whisky which could impact their reputation in future sales. Now, I'm hoping when distilleries are contacted, and it's usually the manager who should be informed, that something will be done about it. At least an acknowledgement, and at least, if possible, that a sample of that whisky is returned to the distillery so they can see for themselves the poor quality of what they may be unwittingly bottling or knowingly bottling. And this is where it gets a little bit unpleasant, because there are certain distilleries who are quite complacent with their reputation, and they're prepared to let some bad stuff go out there in bottlings, the bad batches, right? Why do they do it? Because they know people don't complain. They know that it won't impact their reputation. But I'm telling you, malt mates, that's why the internet's here. Because this is where you come to discuss your bad batches, so as to warn people and advise people against buying these bottlings or even boycotting the brand completely. None of us wants to buy a bad bottle of whisky, particularly when we've paid a hefty premium for it. And the thing is, it may be a nuisance to the industry, well, at least some distillers, when they get complaints about their product, but could be a lot worse. People could simply not just stop buying their brand, but in total disgust, stop buying Scotch whisky completely, and therefore every distillery becomes a loser. It's not right. No whisky should be getting bottled that hasn't been checked and approved. Any bad versions, take the cask out and send it off to the blenders, where it can disappear into a big mix. The problem is when you use a sour cask and you get bad results, it's very difficult to rectify the problem. And what they'll usually do, and I know this, is they'll get a fresh Oloroso, a PX sherry cask, and they'll give it a big sherry overcoat to hide the shortcomings from the original faulty, unsuitable casks. This is something we all have to be aware of, because we're all customers. And it may seem a little bit of tough love, but I tell you, it does need to be tough. Because sometimes in the Scotch whisky industry you come across some very complacent, smug attitudes which really shouldn't be there. It's real life. It's not just the Scotch whisky industry, it's any industry. You'll find that if you go and try and buy a Ferrari. Just sharing. Because I do have a friend and it's the worst car he ever bought. Ever. By a long mile. Whew, we taste a whisky. Decent, competent casks. Nothing wrong with that. It comes with experience. Trust your own judgment. Once you get more experience with whisky, you'll start to notice the devil's in the detail, just as much as the angels are in the detail. And you will come across a bad batch. Don't be silent. Make a complaint. I've complained in the past. I bought a bottle of Talisker and I complained to Diageo, and I'm on record They sorted it out professionally. They sorted out my problem, and I respect them for it. They were professional, very professional, and I've continued to buy what they produce. I hope this helps, because we all buy some bad whiskey at times, but generally it's just a bit disappointing. Perhaps it's the excessive chill filtration, or just it's a new brand, a new flavour that our palate's just not used to. But now and again, it'll jump out at you. Just not very often, but occasionally. This is a really bad bottling. And the bad bottling usually means a bad cask. Either single casks or small batch of casks, in which only a few of the small batch casks can tip the balance badly. And at that point, we need to communicate back to the industry that it's really not acceptable that they're putting out that standard of product, and yet they want even more money through the till for it. That's not reasonable. That's not decent. It really isn't, and it's just not acceptable. And that is why, if you have a legitimate complaint, and it needs to be legitimate, and you're not just spitting the dummy because you don't like the whiskey. This is why you need to get it checked by people you know that drink whiskey. Get it cross-referenced before you go back to the shop from whence you bought it. Now, if you go back to a high street specialist retailer, there's someone to speak to. There's no one to speak to on Amazon. And by the way, their prices are pretty expensive at the moment. So buyer beware, buyer take care. Enough said. I'm Ralphie. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon, malt mates. Bye-bye.